So at our volunteer summit meeting we had earlier in 2025, back in February, we kind of put it to the group, could we use artificial intelligence to comb through the information and maybe act as a primary reader for us? So we have a subgroup of a couple really talented people who have tried out and used AI in practices and outside of the office as well. And we looked at three of the top AI platforms, and we taught it how to grade papers exactly to our process. What we found out was there was quite a bit of diversity. One of our subcommittee members was really good at writing the prompts and got the best results. So you have to teach it. It can't do that on its own when you need it to go through this rigorous process that we do. And it's funny, sometimes AI wants to please you and it answers things that maybe aren't correct. And, you have to go back and teach it to do it the correct way. But our challenge is we have these topics that are so volume heavy, and the pace of information that comes out currently is almost unmanageable for this committee.
Hello and welcome to this whole podcast on iCode Media. Today I had a great conversation with my longtime friend, Dr. Carl Urbanski, and my new friend, Dr. Andrew Morgenstern. We discussed GLP-1s. We discussed the impact on the ocular disease states and diseases that can come from those GLP-1s, as well as just sort of the widespread impact of retiring ophthalmology and the workforce that optometry is expanding into and is going to have to continue to expand into, and really the evidence surrounding GLP-1s and ocular manifestations, as well as the whole evidence-based process that the AOA Clinical Practice Guidelines team has. So please enjoy our conversation. As always, be sure to subscribe to the podcast, write a review, share it with your friends, and support those who support us.
The most common questions I get include, what ophthalmological codes or evaluation and management codes should I use? What ICD-10 codes do I need to bill with this CPT code? What CPT codes can be billed together and what can't? And my favorite, how do I manage a patient who has diabetes who comes in for a quote-unquote routine eye exam? These questions really highlight the confusion and uncertainty that serves as a daunting hurdle for providers, makes it more challenging for them to care for their patients and provide those patients with the best opportunity for a lifetime of ocular health and clear vision. That's why we built iCode Education for this specific purpose. Our mission is to provide optometrists with resources to help you understand disease states, revenue cycles, and billing and coding so that you can put that on autopilot and truly care for your patients. Check out iCodeEducation.com. That's EYECODE education.com. We've developed a premier billing and coding bundle that includes all of our billing and coding resources in one place. We also have a 10% discount code just for listeners of this podcast. Enter the coupon code EYECODEMEDIA22 at checkout. We'd love to work with you. Check out iCodeEducation.com. Hello, dedicated optometrists. Are you looking for a way to support your patient's vision and overall eye health? Let me introduce you to Vision Edge Pro, a visual performance supplement that stands out in our profession. Vision Edge Pro contains a balanced blend of mesozeaxanthine, lutein, and zeaxanthine in a 10-10-2 ratio. This combination has been scientifically shown to increase macular pigment density, which enhances visual performance, including contrast sensitivity and vision in glare situations. Additionally, Vision Edge Pro provides 300 milligrams of DHA and EPA, fulfilling the daily requirements for omega-3s as recognized by the leading health organizations. This ensures your patients receive the essential nutrients their eyes need for optimal health. Whether it's for everyday screen use, night driving, or enjoying the outdoors, Vision Edge Pro supports your patients in seeing their best. Recommend Vision Edge Pro for your patients today and help them achieve clearer, healthier vision. Contact your local MacuHealth representative for more details. Vision Edge Pro, because your patients deserve the best in eye health. Go to MacuHealth.com and use the coupon code PODCAST2024 at checkout for special discounts.
Well, I think probably the best thing to do is just sort of get right into it. When I think about GLP-1s, Carl, you and I have been on email threads that kind of sort of span the spectrum related to just the general goodness versus evilness almost of the medication, right? Like, this doesn't seem like people should be doing it. There's no free lunch. And, we can have all those conversations. I think they're pretty interesting, but they're not really why I had you guys on today. Really what I wanted to do is kind of dive into one is sort of give some background on your evidence-based committee, talk about what that is, so people kind of know what your committee makes up, how you go about the processes, and then really dive deeper, which we've had you on before for some of the other evidence-based clinical practice guidelines from the American Optometric Association. But to kind of give the listeners an overview of that, and then to dive deeper into this, I'll call it I don't know if a white paper is the best term, but sort of some
clinical
guidance
report
for clinical report, evidence-based clinical report from your committee. So I guess Carl, Andy, who wants to tell me about the evidence-based committee?
I think Carl's the chair of the committee, so I think we should do it.
I'm fortunate enough to serve as chair. It's we have a really great team of AOA volunteers, great AOA staff, which includes that Andy's role as he is director of the clinical care section of the AOA, and we have Elisa Cruitt, who is just a fabulous staff member who keeps us all together and keeps usually 2 clinical guidelines going at once. So right now we're in the process of it's in the draft process of the dry age-related macular degeneration clinical practice guideline. The pediatric eye exam guideline has gone through the draft review process. Will be going out for public comment soon. Second edition. Okay. Yeah, because we had done it's a 5-year update on a pediatric clinical guideline. And then, as you know, we published glaucoma, primary open-angle glaucoma, back in October. So we have a very regimented 14-step process where we gather evidence. We, as a team, figure out what kind of questions we want to answer about this disease process, search for papers. We read all of those papers, grade the evidence. We have a writer who puts together a draft for us. And then it goes out for public comment. So there's some very regimented steps to really eliminate bias, make sure we're using good quality evidence, and our team really helps that happen. So,
what do you think has been what do you think? So, if I think back to the glaucoma clinical practice guideline, evidence-based clinical practice guideline, in terms of reaction from the public, both during the comment section and then post publishing of it, what's been the optometric feedback?
So I personally have gotten some feedback on it from people who lecture, some clinicians that teach at some of the schools, and that's one of our hopes, is it gets into the curriculum at the schools, so they're really teaching evidence-based care and not consensus-based care, which it was for years prior to this committee's work. So you lecture quite a bit, and you and some of your colleagues have really tried to work it in and use this information very well in developing your content, both from a clinical practice approach, and then also you mix it in with some practice management flavor as well, which is really helpful to really all of our clinicians that are out there and need to take care of these patients to kind of demonstrate how they can use it in their practice.
I don't know where I picked up on it. Andy, I didn't know you were on staff at the AOA now, but thanks for all of the stuff that you've done historically as well. I know I'm kind of favoring Carl because Carl and I have a long relationship, but
not trying to bust in over here.
I think the thing that I found, so let me reflect a little bit on and I don't know where I picked this up, but it was early in my career, or maybe even from a mentor. I think maybe Jason Ellen kind of sicked me on them. Maybe it could have even been like Randy Brooks and David Cockrell. I served on some committees with them really early on in my career. And I can't remember who it was, but what the clinical practice guidelines I think can do for us as a profession, and actually individuals in the profession allow us to do collectively, is to sort of not have to have uncertainties and it can lessen our uncertainties in uncertain conditions. So as an example, when should I follow up with a patient that has X condition? For example, glaucoma, mild, moderate, severe, glaucoma suspect, low risk, high risk. how often should I see them? When am I overdoing it? How do I know if I have to order more testing to increase my certainty? Well, what might I want to document if I'm outside of the clinical practice guidelines? And so that's why, I mean, Carl, that's why I hammer on it so much, because it provides clarity to this uncertain world where a lot of optometrists feel like they're sort of floundering on this brink of managing the patient appropriately and then being worried about being, labeled as like an overcoder or overbiller, And so that's why they're so valuable, in my opinion, because it gives us something back to fall on as a standard. It doesn't mean that every patient has to fit that standard, but it gives us something to fall back on.
Yeah, so that's an excellent point. I mean, these guidelines are clearly not meant to be the standard of care, and that, are used for litigation or something that you absolutely have to follow to the T, but it's clinical recommendations and the basic care that you need to be providing and the frequency. But as the clinician, it's your nuance and your knowledge that you use to see how that patient fits in this clinical process that we've outlined. And that's what's unique about what we do. Every patient's going to be a little bit different, but at least you have evidence to back you up on how frequently you should do an OCT for a primary open-angle glaucoma patient or gonioscopy or other tests, and that you are not an outlier. These are things that the evidence shows we should be doing regularly.
Yeah. Yeah, Andy, what about you? Has the AOA had feedback on more of this? Do they want that more of it? What's your general sense of like how much more we're going to be investing in this as a profession over time?
Yeah, the reality is that we have to. Well, to answer your first question, the feedback has been great. The feedback has been very positive. There are many people, some loud voices in the room that you hear about all the time, and some not so loud voices that you hear about all the time. The way the guidelines are written, I say that it's a clinical practice guideline. It's not a clinical practice have to, right? And so. Right. What we're trying to do is give the tools to the clinician to practice optometry, to practice medicine to the highest level possible based on what, this distilled information we're providing out through the clinical practice guideline. And I would say that it's incredibly important as we move forward in medicine. And I do want to sidebar with a little bit of AI. I don't know if you're going to get to it. Later in the interview.
We can sidebar. I like sidebars.
Awesome. Well, let's hit it right now.
You might not get me back on track, but we'll take it.
We'll get you back on track. I know what we want to talk about tonight. So with our evidence-based clinical practice guidelines, let's take the parallel of artificial intelligence and all the great things that it can do. One of the things that we've learned through examining artificial intelligence, and I'll let Carl kind of dive into what we're doing as a committee because it's really important. One of the things that we've learned is that artificial intelligence, while very, very good, forward-thinking, opening doors, looking, at new ways to accomplish goals in a quicker, more efficient manner, makes mistakes. And that's one of the things that we're learning through utilizing different AI platforms, and that the process that we go through, that 14-step process, is really one of the only ways that we know of now, to distill purely all of that information that's in the ether of research. What we're trying to do by utilizing these 14 steps and very rigidly staying to these 14 steps is to give our colleagues the best and the cleanest information on how to best provide care for their patients. With AI, I do want to turn it over to Carl. I don't want to dodge this mountain that we want to talk about, but we are doing something really interesting in the evidence-based optometry committee that I think you'll find pretty neat.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about it. Carl, I don't know if you saw our colleague Kyle Clutie did an analysis using, I can't remember which AI. It was a research AI platform, but basically to summarize sort of all of our interventions related to tear volume improvement and improvement with Schirmer score, and it was able to do it like that. And obviously it kind of allows you to distill down what the key points were And then you can go and be like, is this actually true? I can go in, but it allows you to really say, where am I going to focus my efforts?
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was fascinating. Anyway, go ahead, please.
So within the EBO committee, we have a subgroup going now because of how long it took us to do the primary open-angle glaucoma guideline. Because it was a massive amount of information, that's what AI is good at, is getting through that massive amount of information. So at our volunteer summit meeting we had earlier in 2025, back in February, we kind of put it to the group, could we use artificial intelligence to comb through the information and maybe act as a primary reader for us? So we have a subgroup of a couple really talented people who have, tried out and used AI in practices and outside of the office as well. And we looked at 3 of the top AI platforms, and we taught it how to grade papers exactly to our process. What we found out was there was quite a bit of diversity. One of our subcommittee members was really good at writing the prompts and got the best results. So you have to teach it. It can't do that on its own when you need it to go through this rigorous process that we do. And it's funny, sometimes AI wants to please you and it answers things that maybe aren't correct. And, you have to go back and teach it to do it the correct way. But our challenge is we have these topics that are so volume heavy, and the pace of information that comes out currently is almost unmanageable for this committee. We put this GLP guideline out, and shortly after we published it, another paper came out. So as soon as you publish it, it's almost out of date. So the 2 things we're trying to achieve is how can we get more topics covered and write clinical practice guidelines with the help of AI? And the other thing would be, how do we keep them up to date? How do we make them perhaps living guidelines? Because now we don't publish them in a paper form. We have them online on the AOA website. They're accessible, so they can be easily updated. So that's one of our goals, to see how we can use AI instead of human time and capital to achieve some of that.
It would seem like almost if you created enough prompts and forced that AI to kind of follow a pattern where you say put out the GLP-1, this is the standard, and we're going to modify from this document, and you follow all of these specific rules related to analysis, and then we just upload a new paper when it comes out to that new prompt, and it analyzes that new paper, finds out if it's significant, grades it, based on your scale of grading, and then can remove things that maybe not pertinent, but then insert things that are, with specific citations, allowing that group to go in and say thumbs up, thumbs down. It would seem like that would be a really effective way to kind of take what you're doing already, which is using AI to analyze massive amounts of information. But then once you have your standard, it could almost be this nearly automatic evolution. I think you still want the humans to, as Carl, you and you've heard me talk about as the human in the middle, to be like, yes, this is good, no, this is bad. But that could be a really quick way, once you've established this sort of baseline of evidence, to add or subtract.
Yeah, our current process is we have at least 2 humans reading every paper. That's the way we do it now. If it's more than 1 letter grade different, we bring in a 3rd reader as a tiebreaker. And then it goes to our articulation, and we talk through as a committee, here's why I graded it this way or that way. I downgraded the evidence because of this flaw in the paper. So there's a process that we go through. We would still have a committee member or a human reader read every single paper. And you could apply those same rules, that if the AI platform and the human reader were within 1 letter grade or the same or very similar, then you're much more comfortable going forward with that. So we took, what did we take, Andy? Maybe 20 papers, 25 papers from the diabetic
25.
guideline that we had published a year or 2 ago that were already graded by our team. And we had the platforms grade them. And some performed better than others, and some got pretty good at it. So it's showing some promise, but it's still a project we're working on to refine it before we're really comfortable to introduce it. Yeah. So Andy, I'll let you add on to that. Anything I left out?
I would also. So Carl is spot on with all the information. What was really interesting was that we actually utilized it for the. I know we're going to talk about the GLP-1 receptor agonist.
Not anymore. We took an AI sidebar.
I got to throw something in.
Back.
We got to bring it back. So.
Gotcha. So we came up with a clinical report, GLP-1 receptor agonist clinical report for eye care providers, for optometrists. And so wrote out the paper. 3 primary authors were myself, Carl, and
Lynn
Greenspan, just an outstanding optometrist, our primary writer, actually, for our MacDegen paper right now. It's a massive undertaking. And so we wrote the paper out and then utilized AI to try to refine the paper a little bit. A, to see if we missed anything. B, maybe to clean up the English a little bit, to get the order straight, to see if, we wanted to test it out to see if it would actually improve the paper. So Lynn ran it through probably ChatGPT's process. By the way, the 3 platforms that we tried out were ChatGPT, Gemini, and
Claude.
Okay. Were the 3 that we play with. And so we ran it through, and it did a great job, really polished up where we were. We still had to go through editors and all that kind of stuff. And but one of the things that it actually did, and I do want to bring this to the attention of everybody out there, that especially those people that like to write papers, or people that don't like to write papers, and maybe even students that really don't like to write papers because they're crunched for time and all that stuff. We found that the AI model, in some references, actually made up references that don't even exist, that created, that essentially, I guess the working term that we're using with now in the community is they're AI hallucinations. Yeah. And so it actually put in citations and made up references, authors' names, everything. And what was interesting is that, and the way I found it as I was reviewing the document, I was reading through the whole document. It's about 10 pages. It's wonderful. It's on the AOA webpage. I advise everybody go check it out. I was going through the references, and one of the references was a close friend of mine. And I know his bibliography. I know exactly what he's written, what he's done. I've cited a lot of his work. And I went, son of a gun, man, how'd this guy sneak one past me? Like, this is a big paper over here. So I went over to PubMed and all of the databases where all these papers, I couldn't find it. Then I Googled it, couldn't find it. And I ended up emailing him saying, hey, could you send me the full text of this paper? He's like, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. I'd never wrote that paper. And so, the AI model, I think it was ChatGPT, but I don't want to blame it on that one, completely made up a reference just to make the paper happy. And it was in AMA format, APA format.
The citation was perfect, great. Right? Yeah.
So so for those of you out there in podcast land that are writing papers and think that you can just ask an AI model to write a paper for you with references, you can't. And I'll tell you something else that Carl and I and the team have learned. There are telltale signs of a paper written by an AI model that we can easily see pretty definitively. And so we don't want people writing stuff that's, just made up by AI, just smacking their name on it and publishing it out the door.
My experience has been the same. Is if I give it enough citations and I know what the answers are for things, so I can say, please help me answer this question. This is answer 1, answer 2, answer 3, answer 4. Here's the citations that I want you to reference related to the points I'm making. It's pretty good. It's actually quite good. Very, very understandable. Way like to assimilate a 5 or 6 paragraph complex answer when I might be able to say yes because of X, Y, and Z, no because of X, Y, and Z. ABC says this, and that might take me 2 or 3 minutes, but it's information that I already know up here. And I know where the references are for the background. It will be fantastic. But if I just say, please help me to answer this question, find the answer, it's wrong probably 50% of the time.
Yeah, I would agree. So I think there is a skill set, like you were talking about, Chris, that of teaching, like Carl was referencing before, what we were trying to do, teaching the AI model on what you're looking for. You have to get pretty granular. The more granular you get, the better product you're going to get out of the AI model for when you're writing this stuff. And
writing those prompts is critical.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And one can learn from another. We have some brilliant people that are working on this stuff. We had one person who was essentially better at writing the prompts, and those other people learned from that person writing those prompts. And so I think that's where the secret sauce, the magic's going to happen to develop all of this stuff. But what is it, Gigo? Garbage in, garbage out. The more work you do up front, the better product you can have on the back end. And over time, I definitely foresee us as a committee. It's not my decision because I'm not the chair, nor am I the voting block of the committee. But I definitely foresee us utilizing this. It's just going to take us some time to get there.
CooperVision and the AOA have joined forces in a groundbreaking initiative to transform how optometrists treat children with myopia. The Myopia Collective aims to unite our profession and its allies to challenge the status quo and elevate the standard of care for children with myopia. Everyone is invited to become a member of the collective. By joining, you pledge to act in slowing childhood myopia progression. Membership includes regular updates and information about the collective's efforts, access to educational opportunities and resources, and insights from the ambassador optometrists who advocate for community policy and changes supporting the collective's mission. Click the link in the show notes to join the collective today.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's right. And as it gets better and we get better understanding it, I think you're right. It's going to be more useful for sure. And I don't think you can, in the near term for sure, and even in the midterm, I can't imagine that you can allow it to be autonomous. I don't see that. I don't see it being autonomous and being reliable.
Mm-hmm.
There's the other part, and Carl, you've heard me talk about this before, but I talk about it as when we talk about general AI, that's where I think, the Carl Urbanski walking down the beach or the Jersey Shore. You go to the Jersey Shore, Carl?
Rarely, but
that's too far from you.
No.
So, no.
The Pennsylvania Shore. It's beautiful.
Pennsylvania. Yeah. Well, I only bring that up because my brother-in-law grew up in Philly and also went to the Jersey Shore all the time. But I know you're not from Philly, Carl. I think you're not from Philly.
2 hours north.
Yeah. So anyway, the point is that I kind of liken it to like Carl Urbanski walking on the shore, and his mind is just sort of going, right? Like, and then you're like, oh, holy cow, I never thought about that before. And it's a thought that probably only a handful of people might have actually had related to one specific topic and one specific point, which is part of the hallucination, but also it gives you a real idea that you can now take back and start to develop over time. That's specifically human, that AI models right now just don't do. Now, I know people say that they're going to get there, and maybe that will be the case, but like that's what's kind of, when I boil it down to what is human, I think beyond obviously the fact that we've got souls and we've got a creator that's beyond ourselves. I think that is kind of the thinking nature of just like we can hallucinate, but in ways that can be connected to reality. Yeah, I don't know. But I guess that'll probably get better too with AI. So anyway, I'm way off the deep end. These are topics that I could ponder for hours. I want to talk about GLP-1s and some of the ocular effects and some of the what we should take from this guidance that our evidence-based committee has provided for us. So I've read the paper, but I'll sort of let you sort of uncover sort of the problem that exists right now from a healthcare standpoint with these medications, but also an ocular care standpoint with these medications. Then sort of walk us through the side effects that we should be considering, the likelihood of those side effects, and we'll go from there. So talk about the problem, GLP-1s problem. Let's say opportunity first. Opportunity, right? Opportunity for helping patients in general.
So I think the overall problem is just the disease process of diabetes. It's massive. And these new medications have given providers a tremendous ability to perhaps gain control of the patient's blood sugar and help them with other comorbidities at the same time. And the use of these medications has exploded. the amount that were prescribed in the last couple of years. I mean, we can get into the numbers are in this clinical report.
Yeah, I think you said something like 14% of the U.S. population has been prescribed those medications.
So I think
2024.
So in that
12%
yeah,
in 2024,
12%,
which is about 15 million people that had a prescription for these drugs. So even though some of the side effects are quite rare, which we'll get into a little more detail, just the sheer number of people that are on them is, you're going to have people walking through your practice that are on these medications. So the AOA asks us to put out this report so all of our clinicians are really aware of, one, the prevalence of diabetes, two, the prevalence of how many people are on these medications, and then, of course, what we should be looking for. The last thing that we got into in the paper was also the very real issue of the sheer manpower of optometry or eye care providers that are needed to care for these people. You know, the day of a endocrinologist or primary care physician referring to a retinal specialist to care for these 12 million people, it's impossible. So optometry is very much going to be the people taking care of a lot of these patients and doing those exams. So our providers and clinicians need to be aware of what could go wrong potentially. So, Andy, you want to add anything on to that?
Yeah, I do. I want to harp on a couple of things because I think it's incredibly important, really for the whole U.S. population to hear these numbers, but especially our colleagues in optometry. And that is, if you look at the CDC surveillance on diabetes, and I'm not going to put you on the spot, Chris. I'm not going to say, hey, give me a number type of thing. But I do want to bring up the fact that almost 1 in 7 Americans are diabetic right now. I mean, the number is staggering in terms of how many people have diabetes in this country. Certain drugs are still the primary, metformin is still the primary drug of choice for diabetics. However, if you look at the graphs on how these drugs are getting prescribed, you can only imagine what the GLP-1 receptor agonist plot looks like as it more and more and more. As of 2024, 12% of Americans have tried a GLP-1. That was 2024. It's already September 2025. I will bet you right now that we don't know a friend or colleague that does not know someone on a GLP-1. Now, they may not tell you about it, but I'm sure that there is someone in your circle, at least one person that is on this medication, either for the primary use, the intended use, which is diabetes, or for weight loss, because this is being used as a weight loss tool as well. Your original question is what do people need to know? People need to know that this class of drugs is incredibly effective at lowering hemoglobin A1C. It's incredibly effective as a tool to help reduce body mass to lower weight. It's also and with that, what comes with weight loss? Well, blood pressure gets lowered. Fatty liver disease gets lowered. Toxicity to the kidneys gets lowered. Heart disease goes down. So there's great secondary effects to this drug for the population of the United States because we're high blood pressure, coronary artery disease, cholesterol, liver dysfunction, kidney dysfunction. We're talking the top killers in the United States. So the drug is great. But like you said, and like we all know, that there is no perfect drug out there, and there are certain drugs that have side effects. Now, the side effects, I don't know if you want to get into it right now, but the side effects are rare, and the ophthalmic side effects are rare to very rare, as certain different groups have classified it. The main one that we really get concerned with, where there have been reports, significant reports in the literature, not significant in terms of the number, but this is a significant condition, are NAIONs, non-arteritic anterior ischemic optic neuropathy, which we all know is potentially catastrophic to an eye because its effects are potentially not reversible, and so there's a significant amount of vision loss associated with NAIONs, and NAIONs are the most common vascular etiology of vision loss in the eye, and so while the rates of them are very low, very, very low in the population, the risk factor goes up over 50, and then those with comorbid factors go up. And really, we all probably learned the term a disc at risk, right? So we're looking at a small optic nerve with a small cup to disc ratio where the vasculature is kind of shoved through that little hole. And when you have essentially through all the literature that Carl and I and the rest of the team reviewed, when you have a patient on a GLP-1 and you have a pretty rapid decline in blood sugar over a short period of time, that's where the risk of the NAION, and when you combine it with a disc at risk and a rapid drop in blood sugar over a short period of time, they think those are the major factors that are leading to the NAION in this population.
What is it? So what is the relationship between rapid blood sugar loss and that amount of edema? Is it the same underlying pathophysiology that would occur where you'd think about, just general diabetic retinopathy getting progressively worse? Is it leading to more ischemic events? Is that where the drop in blood sugar is
essentially? Yes.
Problem?
Yeah, I think there's some vascular, whether it's a vasoconstriction, vasodilation episode, the eye is essentially stroking out in that little area. We don't have any NAIONs from a GLP-1 receptor agonist on video. We don't have a camera in anybody's eye to see the whole thing. So these are all, I would say, they're all anecdotal until you have good video, right? Or until you have the direct evidence. But, this information, this is not coming out of the primary care optometrist office. This is the information that we're getting from, significant retinal specialist literature when we put this clinical report together. That's not to say that an optometrist can't do it, but these are the people that are looking at these eyes every day and seeing the sequelae from an NAION in this population. So it's the answer is I don't know, and I don't know is an okay answer for something like this, but we know that the reports that are coming in are showing a I think it was like 1 in 10,000 was the statistic, which was it's a doubling effect of that 1 in 10,000 rate with the cohort of patients that are in the GLP-1 receptor agonist population, the NAION.
The challenge with the evidence is all of the studies that we reviewed for this report were observational studies. None of them were cause and effect studies. Right. So we're theorizing as to what exactly caused it. There will be, and there's more, coming out regularly. So, it was a twofold increase over the 1 in 10,000 patients for ischemic optic neuropathy, and then it doubled that risk. And yes, your reference for someone who has retinopathy when they go on these drugs, that's another key thing that we need to be monitoring for, because as you have this rapid decrease in their blood sugar, their retinopathy often gets worse. So that's one of the things that we recommend. They need a baseline exam before they go on it. If they have retinopathy, they need to be seen more frequently, because that's also a known risk when you go on these medications.
What's really important to know here is, if let's use math instead of words. We have a lot of diabetics out there. We have a lot of people taking these drugs, and when you have a small percentage of a tremendous number, you're going to have a pretty big number. And so optometrists are playing a very critical role in managing these patients. Once a patient goes on a GLP-1 receptor agonist, that is great to help them with their systemic health. But it also puts the eye at risk a little bit more based on that observational data that Carl was talking about. And it's our job to watch them. And so, Carl, I don't know if you want to get into and that's why we put a work utilization section in there, because now we have a ton of people that are taking these drugs. We have a ton of people that both optometry and ophthalmology, and especially the retina specialists, agree need to be monitored closer. And somebody's got to look at these eyes. And Carl, I'll turn it over to you about the work utilization, or the utilization of the workforce within optometry and ophthalmology. That's really interesting.
Well, just before you get into that, I think, I was just running some quick numbers as you're going through that. I mean, first is, you're talking about, 1,200 patients extra every year that are likely going to have an NAION that otherwise wouldn't, based on the rough numbers that you gave me. if we said that everybody followed this guideline, so all these patients that are on these medications follow this guideline, and we dispersed, and you guys would know my numbers are probably not exactly right, but if we disperse those patients across 45,000 optometrists, that's within our existing patient population or new patients. That's about 300 and some odd patients that are going to be in, on average, every optometrist practice. If you assume there's 45,000 optometrists in the country that are practicing and seeing these patients. And so like, it's not a small number. So that, I think that helps when we think about the workforce. And now again, Carl, you're just adding to my prevalence data, my whole prevalence slide, the power of prevalence that I like to go through. It's like, now we're just stacking and stacking and stacking the amounts of information that optometrists have to be responsible for caring for our patients. So tell me about the workforce.
So, I mean, the numbers you laid out make it very clear that there aren't enough retinal specialists or general ophthalmologists to care for these patients. They need to be doing other things that they are talented and better trained to do. Optometrists need to fill that role. And most of these patients are in our practice anyway. So if you have a patient who comes in who's on a GLP-1, you've probably seen them in the last year. You would already know the status of their retinopathy. You could recommend, well, I'm going to see you in 3 months or 6 months since you just started on this new medication. Hopefully you've documented their cup-to-disc ratio and looked at their nerves, so you know the disc at risk. So you're going to have that conversation with them about if you have a sudden vision loss, you need to call me immediately. And then we're going to talk to your team and decide if you should be stopping this medication or there are other comorbidities that you need to continue on this drug. Because the reality is death from a heart attack or kidney failure is worse than unilateral blindness. So,
right.
All of that needs to be weighed, and we're not the ones making that decision, but we're an integral part of the team that's providing the care and communicating that with the diabetic management team that we need to be a part of, especially for these patients because of this additional risk with these medications from an ocular standpoint.
Yeah, what I love, one of the things that actually helps my conversation. So, Carl, one of the things that you've heard me talk a lot about that we consult a lot on is how to sort of break down the care that we need to provide so that we can provide the care that a patient deserves based on their specific disease state. And also be able to fit that into the reality of the complexities of, medical payers and vision payers and all these sorts of things. But one of the things I really appreciate about the clinical practice guidelines, especially when you're updating them regularly, is it's an easy conversation for me to have with my patients when you say, okay, you're now on this medication. I want to follow up in 3 months with you to make sure that this isn't changing. I can actually abdicate some of my authority to this update, right? So I can say, we have new evidence-based guidance on how to manage patients who are on GLP-1s. And because of X, Y, and Z, that guidance recommends that we do this. And so I think we should follow that, right? So like, it gives us not even just allowing us to internalize it, but you see how, maybe I'm wrong, but you see how like the authority I have is good with patients that I've built trust with, but then also abdicating some of that authority to somebody beyond myself to say like, here's, and oh, by the way, this is a recommendation, this is a guideline, but it doesn't apply to you. And so we're not going to follow it, or it absolutely applies to you. So we were going to follow it, right? That just helps so much in the way we communicate with our patients. And it allows us to have those conversations in patients where we're not having to get into the weeds of, is this routine or medical or whose insurance, what. I mean, that just becomes this whole other sidebar that leads to uncertainty within the profession. And these sorts of documents, I think, help clarify it if we understand how to use them.
Sorry. Yeah, I always try to explain, people I always ask, well, what's an evidence-based clinical practice guideline? Why do we need them? And I use the example of just imagine if it was the day before an evidence-based clinical practice guideline was written, and you go to your doctor and you take a blood test and your PSA comes back high, and somebody does a biopsy and they say, okay, you have prostate cancer and we need to treat you. And, you go to a cancer doctor and the cancer doctor says, we're going to treat you with XYZ 1, 2, 3. That's going to be the treatment regimen. And, I guess how many times in a situation like that, I have to say that you probably, with blind faith, trust the doctor is giving you the right recipe for the treatment that's the most up to date course, as opposed to this is what I learned in school and this is what I've been doing all along and this one usually works best. But newer procedures and newer technologies give you that extra 5% or 10%. I mean, those are big numbers when you're dealing with life-threatening treatments. And so before the process for evidence-based clinical practice guidelines came out, anything that was written in a journal was just evidence-based information. So somebody can read a journal and say, grab it off the shelf essentially and say, aha, this is evidence-based clinical, an evidence-based article. I'm going to use this. But there was no rigor to it. There was no process to it. There was no throwing out the bad stuff and only keeping the good stuff. And so what we're doing with these evidence-based clinical practice guidelines is taking all that information, and just like you said, Chris, we're giving the doctors the most up-to-date tools on how to best practice optometry, essentially, in our situation. But it happens in every other branch of medicine. And I would hope that when it comes to that time where you need that procedure or that surgery or that treatment, that your doctor is utilizing some evidence-based clinical practice guideline to guide them with the highest or the best results for your potential condition. It's very serious. We take this as a tremendous responsibility, and we're trying to produce the best clinical tool so our colleagues can practice at the highest level to give our patients the best quality healthcare outcome.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, I think let's hit back on Carl. You did the workforce projections. I mean, the ones I remember. So the ones I remember kind of stopped at 2030, but I think there's now new ones that go out to 2025. And basically, the first workforce study, or the most recent before the previous workforce study that the AOA looked at was, we're going to see the demand for medical services increasing something like 20%. The workforce in ophthalmology was going to be reduced by, I can't remember, 1.3%, and the workforce in optometry was going to increase by something like 10% or 13%. But that's even larger now when you project that out to 2035. Mm-hmm. Isn't that right?
Yeah, the numbers for the ophthalmology workforce will decline by 12% in supply, and so that's going to result in like a 30% inadequacy by 2035. So, it's just the numbers are insurmountable. I mean, there's no way that residency programs are going to produce that many ophthalmologists and catch up for that to that. And I wouldn't say that optometry will be producing enough providers, perhaps, to care for all of these patients. It's that much of a problem.
I say that all the time. I say if optometry is practicing the way we're trained to practice, and now there's a lot of barriers to that. Most of those I think are are self-defined, but there's also some external variables. But there's not enough of us. If we do the things that we're supposed to do for in the clinical practice guidelines, there's not enough of us. And that actually is so real. It's really pretty freeing when you think about it, because then you never really have to look at somebody down the street as competition. They're the George Foster, God rest his soul. They're your cousin, and you can think about them like that as opposed to competition. So yeah, the last thing I wanted to hit on with GLP-1s then is the third kind of risk, which is choroidal neovascularization in patients with AMD. So to kind of round this out, we've got a progression or an increased risk of NAIONs, an increased risk of progression of diabetic retinopathy. I didn't remember seeing anything about onset of diabetic retinopathy. So is it also the case that if the patient has no retinopathy, they're more likely to develop retinopathy once they go on these medications? I just can't remember. It's intuitively that I would say yes, but I can't remember in the data. And also choroidal neovascularization.
So from the information that we have, it's patients with existing diabetic retinopathy.
Yeah. Okay.
So
that's patient what worsens. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So if you have existing diabetic retinopathy, there is not only is there a worsening of the diabetic retinopathy, the process is sped up, whereas if it was a normal timeline for progression, that timeline is actually moving at a quicker rate in patients with GLP-1 receptor agonists. Yeah.
On the neovascular AMD topic, it was a population-based study, roughly about 140,000 patients, and the risk of developing exudative macular degeneration went from 0.1% in that cohort to 0.2 if they were on a GLP-1. So again, it's not
basically 100 patients. Yeah,
it's a
out of
twofold
100
increase,
patients, one.
but
yeah,
it's still a low number, just like the anterior ischemic optic neuropathy is a low number per thousands of patients, but the risk is significantly higher.
Yeah. Wait, so you said 0.1, is that right? You said 0.1
0.1 in the general population to 0.2 in the people that are on
So 1 in
GLP-1.
1,000 patients that were treated with this will be harmed by
likely to progress to wet.
Yeah. Okay, so then your kind of guidance. So the take home from all of this is how ought to I stratify if we're gonna try to generalize the population. The practicing OD. What should I do when I see a patient that's on a Ozempic or Wegovy or Manjaro? What should I do differently?
And it's going to happen tomorrow, right?
Yes, exactly.
Those patients will walk in. I think the most important thing to do is encourage the continuance of the drug and to say this is a smart idea and this you're in a good place with a good medicine, that it's very safe, very effective, and by the amount of people that are taking it, incredibly low risk. However, you do have to be aware that there are risks to the eye. If you do see sudden vision loss, if you do see a sudden painless loss of vision in an eye, get back here immediately. I need to see you double quick. I think you have to stress the need for in-person comprehensive eye exams in this population, that because you are on a GLP-1 receptor agonist, that means there is a health, likely, if it's not just for weight loss, if it's for diabetes, you're in that population now that needs that annual in-person comprehensive dilated eye exam, because you do have the potential for other diseases that can happen within the eye. Just because you're on the GLP-1 receptor agonist that's not the Band-Aid, that's not the panacea and make your diabetes go away. So I think those are incredibly important to stress. I think those are the most important things. And I'm sorry, I'm just looking down, trying to look at my reference of my clinical recommendations that we wrote on here. But, I also think that photo documenting, which is one of our clinical recommendations, when you have the opportunity to document with a photograph of the back of the eye, I think it's really important. If someone does have a disc at risk, if someone does have a small nerve, small CD ratio, let them know about that 1 in 10,000 risk doubling. And that, even though it's a small number, it potentially could happen. And that's why it's important to have you back. But it's definitely not a reason to stop using the medication.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think you summarized your recommendations well. What was the extra couple papers? Can you mention any of those things that are they going to change any of that based on what's recently been published?
So there's one major thing that we as docs have to be aware of, and patients do as well, and that is for any procedure that you would be getting anesthesia for, if possible. The rule from the American Society of Anesthesiologists is that the patient should discontinue use of the GLP-1 receptor agonist at least 1 week prior to having the procedure. I know I'm over 50. I scheduled one of my routine colonoscopies recently. It's coming up down the line a little bit. And in the paperwork, it says if you do take a GLP-1 receptor agonist, you have to stop it at least a week before, or we will cancel your procedure. And the reason why that is because the GLP-1 receptor agonist does slow down your gastric emptying. Yeah. And so what they don't want you to do is basically have an episode where you kind of, without using bigger terms, push back up the food out of your gut, choke on it. Right. So that's a biggie.
Okay. Yeah, I think this is helpful. Let me ask one. This might be a
that applies to cataract surgery as well, by the way.
Oh, even the anesthesia with cataract surgery?
Yeah, if you're getting sedated for any reason, they want you off of it. So Now, a retinal detachment, we have obviously some emergent procedures that patients have to go under for. If it's an emergent retinal detachment, there's nothing you can do about that. You still have to put the patient, but the anesthesiologist needs to be aware that the patient's on a GLP-1 receptor agonist.
And the other piece of evidence was when we put it together, the guidance from the European community about anterior ischemic optic neuropathy and the reporting data, they were recommending to stop the GLP-1 if that occurred in one eye of a patient. Since we published the report, ophthalmology and neurology in the U.S. came and took a different stance and said, because these patients have so many other comorbidities and this drug has so many other benefits, they're going to look at it on an individual basis and don't want to automatically stop the drug. So, in our role, not treating systemic disease, we're not making that call. So we're going to communicate that. But, that's a big decision. If your patient has lost pretty much total vision in one eye and the other disc looks the same, how do you have that conversation with the patient?
Yeah. Well, I think you have the conversation as you described, and then you communicate that to their primary care doctor or their endocrinologist, and then they've got to decide if it's worth the risk,
Right.
at that point. So let me ask you this, Carl, you and I sort of, when we think about, and I don't have any problem with this, by the way, because I think it's easy. I just do it, and I'm not really concerned about all the other sort of what if scenarios. But one of the things we see come up all the time is in some of our discussion groups that you and I are involved in, Carl, is, okay, well, if I have a ultra wide field screening device, do I really have to use dilation? Why did the AOA evidence-based clinical practice guidelines use dilation? Now I got to dilate. What drop should I dilate with? And, how do I do this process? Why did you guys put dilation in there?
So for this,
go ahead, Carl.
for this specific guideline, you need a stereoscopic view of that nerve, because if you want to see retinal edema around that disc, for the risk of non-paralytic anterior ischemic neuropathy, you may not see that in a non-3D photo. So that would be one obvious thing to me why you would probably want to dilate these patients and not rely on your screening retinal device. As good as they are, that would be one clear thing where I would want to do it. If I had a patient with retinopathy and they were put on this, I'd want a photo to document where the level of that retinopathy is. So, in a perfect world, you're going to do both. We know when you use it regularly clinically, you find things that you don't always pick up with your best indirect and retinal examination. So I think both are very useful, but the standard still is for a dilated retinal exam, because you're looking at other lens opacities and other things you're going to find with that dilated retinal exam, and a good stereoscopic view of the disc as well. So Andy, you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I mean, in my, I know when I get inside of a dilated eye and I'm looking at even just a posterior pole, looking at just the optic nerve, the view that I get to that nerve is incredible. Some of the things of spontaneous venous pulsations, I'm seeing, like Carl said, in depth, and I'm getting a very, very clear assessment of that optic disc. The eye is a dynamic piece of equipment. A picture is a snapshot in time, but getting inside the eye and looking around and moving it around, not to say that I scleral depress every single patient, but that's a tool that you can't use on fundus photography. And so there are benefits to dilating a patient. I always ask myself the question, if the whole United States was afforded a ultra wide field photograph instead of everybody getting dilated, would be better off, in a perfect world. And so, it's a question that I can't answer, because I think that would be a really cool thing if every human in the United States had an ultra wide field photograph, as opposed to skipping out on some that don't get the eye exam. I think we'd be doing a great service. It just doesn't work that way. But the reality is that dilation is still the standard of care, to the best of my knowledge, in addition to having that great stereoscopic view of the back of the eye. Yeah.
And this is unique. This is unique.
You're not gonna get pushback from me. It's an easy procedure.
Yeah.
If you're looking at it to check a box, it's pretty easy to check a box. right? But if you really want to use, if you, to your point, we have ultra wide field imaging, and I dilate a ton of patients, right? But I'm trying to give, I hear the sort of people in the room is like, well, one reason I can hear somebody saying right now, Carl, is, well, one reason it's the standard of care is because you put it in our guidelines. But I got and oh, by the way, I've got a OCT imager, and I can look at thickness on OCT, which is way better. I could probably pick up even. I'm just sort of being a voice for
no.
the
I think it's an excellent question.
Yeah. So I can we've got ultra wide field imaging devices that can pick up subtle, DME that I would never see ophthalmoscopically.
Right.
Same thing with subtle, if I've got serial OCT over time of the nerve that I might never see if I'm just using stereoscopic ophthalmoscopic evaluation. And so I just wonder if it's just interesting to me is like there's going to be a time where this controversy is going to go to bed because the language becomes more broad.
I do. I will just to support the dilation group. I would say for a diabetic, just cataracts are still one of the number one secondary effects of the disease. And getting a good look at the lens in a dilated eye is always critically important, just to look at the whole eye. So I think, for the folks out there, it still serves its value, and it still serves its purpose in the diabetic eye. I still think I get some better OCT images on a dilated eye than a non-dilated eye as well. So again, any evaluation is better than no evaluation. If we didn't have the ability to dilate and everybody can get an ultra wide field fundus photograph, I think we'd be serving the public very, very well. But if given the opportunity, if we can dilate, I think we're going to get a better overall evaluation of the diabetic eye. And these patients on GLP-1 receptor agonists are largely diabetic.
I think
at all.
No. I think it's an interesting discussion to be had. I fall into like if our guidelines tell me to dilate, dilate. I just don't think it's that much of a burden. And I don't think it's that like I agree with you, Andy, is that I get a lot more dynamic information. There's absolutely things that, and to your point, Carl, I see more with both than I see with one or the other. But you get, it's something that comes up all the time, and
Sure.
And it's worth having the discussion about. And I'm not the best person to have that discussion, because I'm sort of playing devil's advocate, because I do think, I look back and like people battled for a long time to get the authority to dilate, and now we're battling for a long time to try to, minimize that authority.
Yeah.
But you won't get, I am not the person that's going to really, genuinely make that point, because I can see both sides pretty easily, and I just don't think dilation is that much of a burden as a patient or as a clinician. And I think there's value to it.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to hear why.
So if I can bring it back to, it's in any of these guidelines that we write, whether it's a clinical report or a clinical practice guideline, it's still up to the clinician to decide what they know is best or want to do for this patient, because they're the ones providing the care. I think why we would keep it in there, let's go back to the name of this committee. It's the evidence-based committee. There's not enough evidence out there to say that wide field imaging is equal to or better than a dilated fundus exam, especially for patients who have active disease processes. So until someone does that study and we have good evidence to support that, I don't think we can vary from what is traditionally done, which is a diabetic retinal exam, because the evidence just isn't there to support that yet.
One other thing, if I can,
and that's what we rely on.
I think it's great. Yeah. I think, if I can, before I turn it over to you guys to final remarks, I would say one of the things that I find really valuable is when I read a portion of your paper that links patients who have a disease state or who are being treated for a disease state that are at risk, blatantly at risk for another ocular disease state, that says, hey, Chris, pay attention. You've got a patient that has this, pay attention to that, where you're sort of drawing parallels. I think in a lot of cases, I find optometrists have become They believe a lot of their value is like the detect and refer value. Like, oh, I found diabetic retinopathy. I'm going to write a nice letter to the primary care doctor, and that's going to somehow be a real value to the healthcare system. But where they become a value is that they've detected that, but then they've also detected that that patient is at greater risk for neurotrophic keratitis or ocular surface disease or binocular vision problems, or, like they can provide all of that care. And if we relegate ourselves to the value we provide to a healthcare system is purely based on the systemic diseases we can detect and refer for, or detect secondary complications from those medications, then we're missing a huge portion of our value. So the more times when you guys are in here that you say, oh, here's a link to this, pay attention to the cornea, pay attention to this, I think it's just super helpful. And, you did that really, there was again, I've said this in the podcast, I've said it at audiences across the country, but like in my mind, one of the most ground shaking recommendations that the glaucoma guidance had was that we can't, not only should we not ignore the ocular surface, but the patient deserves to have their ocular surface evaluated. And that, in my mind, the more of those kinds of links, when they're legitimate, not that we're searching for them, but when they're legitimate, I think become a really help to the total patient care, the comprehensive care model, and ultimately the value that optometrists serve the population beyond I'm detecting the manifestations of a systemic disease, or I'm detecting the secondary side effects of a medication. I'll give you the last word. That was a way for me to say kudos to you.
Well, thank you very much, Chris.
Yeah. Thanks for giving us the opportunity to come on and talk about these guidelines. I am very grateful for the volunteers that support what we do. And Andy and I have done a couple of these podcasts and sort of become of the face, but we are really supported by a whole team of about 25 other docs that make all of this happen, and some very talented writers as well who get the information from these papers into a digestible format that, thank you, I'm glad you find it as useful as you do. And making those connections, those little things that we would overlook, we should be providing that full continuum of care for all of these disease processes. There's no treatment that we start on a patient doesn't have a potential to worsen or cause a side effect. So we always need to be aware of that. And that's really the root of this clinical report. It's an incredible medication that's doing good things for a lot of people, but it's not without risk. So we just really need to be aware of that. So, get the word out. AOA has supported us, the board of directors, with what we do. And we just want to get this information in the hands of our docs because it's really important stuff.
It's great.
Absolutely. Final words, I would echo what Carl said. I would also say, as it relates to this, the GLP-1 receptor agonist, for those patients that you do that are on there, make sure that to make that connection that Chris was talking about, if you're on the drug, get in for those eye exams, because it's an excuse to get your patient back a little bit sooner, really, because there are real risks that are associated with it.
Yeah, thank you. I'll put a link in the show notes to what we've been referencing today, directly from the AOA's website. And then, listen, guys, if you come up, if there's other updates to this or whenever your next evidence-based guidance comes out and you want to maybe drop the draft or discuss it, it's an open door, my friends. Thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
We can leak the information through your podcast, I guess, Chris.
Say that again.
We could leak the information through your podcast. Would that be acceptable?
If you want to. Hey, all right. If you want to. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Sure.
Excellent.
But thanks for coming on. Thanks for all the work you guys do. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having us.
You're welcome.